Well, thanks for having me, Kyle, and giving me the opportunity to explain to our community what's going on here in the Denver courts and also statewide. It's our intent to resume our civil jury trials. We're going to do that in progressive phases, as I'll describe further in a moment. But everything that we're doing is being done in a way that uh, definitely is directed to ensuring public safety and the safety of our employees, but also gives us the opportunity to accomplish the necessary functions that we have to accomplish the work that we have to do. There have been a number of cases over the course of time, particularly since I want to say going back to March when the Chief Justice entered his order suspending the jury calls in all across the state. There have been a number of cases that we've not been able to proceed on. Obviously, we have constitutional requirements that certainly with the criminal cases that we have to hear those cases, and other folks who have legitimate cases that need to be heard. And we have decided that at this point in time, in consultation with the Chief Justice, but also in consultation with our local public health authority, that we can do so safely, and we should do that promptly. And so that's the spirit underlying our decision to go forward, and that's why we're sending out jury summons to our citizens.
We're looking at a time now in Colorado where our case count is on the rise, our rates are on the rise, and we're seeing more public health restrictions, not less. Why is this the time to have people back in courtrooms?
Well, I want to make sure that we're clear that we are being attentive to the public health concerns. And when people come into jury service now, what they'll find is a completely different experience, Kyle, than what they had in the past. We are calling in very small groups of people to help us do the cases that we're going to be hearing. We're going to start out slowly. We're starting out with what we call a soft start. We're actually going to hear a couple criminal trials next week. We're bringing in panels to allow us to complete those cases. We're going to gather data and information from those experiences and then apply that to the trials that we're going to have going forward starting on August 3rd. The Chief Justice's ban or restriction on summoning jurors expires on that date. And so here in Denver, we're going to be calling jurors, asking them to appear beginning that date to assist us with the very important work that we have to complete. In terms of the public safety, what they'll find, as I noted, is it's a very different process now. We have less jurors coming in. We're hearing less trials initially, and we're going to gradually build up to hearing more. All of our staff and everyone involved in the process is going to be properly socially distant at 6 feet. We've measured off all the courtroom space, the jury assembly space. All of those things have been staged to ensure that we're compliant with those requirements from public health. And all of our measures have been taken to ensure that public health as well. I've issued an order requiring everyone entering the courthouse facilities wears a mask at all times as they are conducting business with the court. So we're all going to honor that as well. And we are confident, along with the input from, like I said, the public health authorities, that we can accomplish this in a manner that allows us to meet our constitutional obligation, but also allows it to do it safely, fundamentally for the public health of everyone, including the jurors and all participants.
I imagine the number one question that we're going to get is, what if I receive a jury summons and I am at high risk for COVID-19 or somebody in my family is, do I still have to report?
Well, what we're asking folks to do is to make sure that they reach out and contact their local jury commissioner. If it's in Denver, you can reach out to our jury commissioner and let them know of your circumstance. We understand that there are some folks who are not able to serve under these circumstances, and we recognize and appreciate that, and we will honor that. But we want to make sure that we're also giving those folks who want to serve also the opportunity to serve. And obviously, as I said, we have the obligation to go forward with these cases. So.
You mentioned that you're going to be calling a smaller pool. You're also going to be doing fewer trials. But the fact that you're so restricted in the number of people that you can call, should that signal to the public that you're much more likely to get seated on a jury if you're called now?
That's a fair question. I actually hadn't thought of that one, Kyle. But I think what it signals most importantly is that we're doing our best to uphold our responsibility to protect the rights of the individuals who wish to bring a dispute to the courts and have it resolved, whether it's a an allegation of criminal conduct or whether it's a significant civil dispute, we have an obligation to afford the venue to those individuals in those cases. And what it's signaled to the jurors is that indeed we are doing our best to honor that obligation and opportunity.
So I think about how the school systems are getting ready to go back to school, and each school district has this really detailed scenario of what happens if a kid gets sick, what happens if a teacher gets sick, what happens if a principal gets sick. Do you guys have a similar system for the courts? So a trial starts. What happens if a juror gets COVID? What happens if somebody in the juror's family? What happens if an attorney or a defendant or the judge? How would that work?
Well, that's a good question. What we would typically do, I'm sensitive to what you're describing. My oldest daughter is a teacher, and I've been very in tune with some of the plans that she's talking about that they're going through. I can tell you that we definitely have plans of how we would manage those circumstances. Each case really is managed on a case-by-case basis, though, Kyle. And so we would look at the individual judge hearing the case to make judgments and determinations for that particular case at that time. Obviously, we've taken precautions. We're asking folks in particular, please don't come if you have any of those circumstances, if you're at risk to the COVID virus, if you have tested positive, if you are presenting with any symptoms of the disease or the virus, please don't come. Call your jury commissioner and reschedule. So, in that event, certainly we can't account for all circumstances. And I think if something were to happen of that nature, all our judges are experienced and they understand that there were to be a matter that they would have to address. And so typically it would be on a case-by-case basis, but it could involve, depending on what stage of the case, it could be involved simply excusing that juror. It could involve declaring a mistrial if it's a criminal case and starting over. It could involve any number of scenarios, and we would be prepared to deal with that.
But if I hear you correctly, in the courtroom situation, the judge is in control of the room, so individual judges would be making individual determinations about what to do in each circumstance.
Well, each case is different. I mean, obviously we have an understanding that we don't want to present a circumstance that is inappropriately exposing folks to any increased risk or any potential harm. That's why we've taken the great steps that we have to prepare for this endeavor. The extra work that our judges have put in and our staff have put in to plan for this. I think we sent you some information to kind of give you an idea of some of the things we've been working through, is significant. And so while we can't anticipate every potential circumstance, we have done our best to anticipate those that we figure could possibly happen. And we're prepared to account for that.
Did you guys have a discussion about doing temperature checks at the door? A lot of businesses and organizations are doing that. If I read the document correctly, I think it said that jurors would be asked to kind of come in on the honor system after taking their temperature at home. Why not check at the door?
Well, there are certain constitutional limitations that we have, and when the public in general is coming on into the building, we are expecting that particularly if they want to serve, that they're going to follow those requirements. We've had a couple of other jurisdictions around the state that have started with some soft starts in the last week or so. And, they've had similar experiences where maybe a juror might have shown up and realized, well, geez, I didn't really quite feel right today. I felt a little dizzy, a little bit of a fever, and we've just asked them to go home before they ever enter the building. So we're in the process still of negotiating and working through those types of specific screening procedures. But yeah, in large respects, we're asking the parties to ensure that they are self-reporting and not coming in if they have a fever. Checking their temperature as well.
Last question for you. Based on my limited knowledge of how a courtroom works, a lot of it depends on various people kind of looking each other in the eye and determining their veracity and so forth. We will have a statewide mask order for all public indoor places as of midnight. We really going to have courtrooms where judges and defendants and witnesses and so forth will be wearing masks as ordered by the governor in public indoor spaces?
Well, Kyle, I can share with you one. I just became aware of the governor's press conference today, and so I don't know specifically the content of his order. I'd have to look at that and see the content of it and how it applies to the courts. But what I can share with you is the Chief Justice has been consistent throughout this pandemic that we are doing our best to be good citizens in the courts and complying with public health orders. That's why we've spent all this time working with them to ensure we have a process that's not only fair and allows for the equal presentation of the cases that need to be heard, but it's also, and most importantly, safe for the litigants and for the public. And so in that scenario, if we were in a scenario where we're asked to wear masks in the courtroom, my orders currently require that everyone who's a participant in the trial will be wearing some face covering of some sort, and specifically masks in particular. There may be circumstances where a judge may require that someone temporarily remove their mask for a particular purpose. That's part of the court proceeding, as part of the trial itself. That's up to an individual judge and their discretion as they conduct the trial. But we certainly intend to wholeheartedly comply with any public health orders. And one of the reasons we set the process up the way we have, Kyle, is to give us a chance to maintain flexibility. We're going to, as we gather data from these trials, as we slowly ramp up to hopefully some point of whatever we call normal is now, is we're going to have a chance to learn from each of those experiences. And obviously we have our finger to the wind, if you will, with trying to assess what the current circumstances are on the ground. And if, one thing we've all learned in this COVID experience, I'm sure you've learned it too, and that is we speak in terms of the now. As we know now and under the circumstances as we understand them currently, this is what we intend to do. Obviously, if those circumstances change, we have the flexibility built into our plan to allow us to accommodate that.
I'm sure there's nothing more annoying in your line of work than when people try to ask questions or make judgments based on what they've seen on Law and Order, but it is the world that we live in. Do you envision a scenario where, literally there are going to be courtroom conversations about whether this or that witness takes their mask off or leaves it on or that sort of thing? We know that the defense attorneys and prosecutors leave nothing to chance. They're professionals and they have a job to do. I imagine whether or not a witness or a defendant is wearing a mask is something that could materially affect a case. Is that fair to say?
Well, that's a question that someone might make. It's an argument that someone might make as well. And it's up to the individual judges hearing those cases to ascertain the extent to which that's a credible argument and then make a professional judgment as to how to manage that. But I can tell you, typically the issue of masks surrounds the question of at least in a criminal case, the defendant's opportunity to confront their accusers. And how that is best managed. Otherwise, in a case, you're looking, as you noted earlier, the credibility of the parties or the credibility of the witness and how best do you gauge that. We have circumstances available where we can assist in that, whether it's temporarily providing someone a face shield in lieu of a mask to allow them to accomplish those kinds of things. There's a lot of flexibility, as I noted, built into our plan. So, we're anticipating those things. In particular, do I anticipate that occurring? Certainly some of the defense arguments would probably need to make that argument. It's up to the individual judges to make that assessment, whether it's applicable in a particular case.
All right. Chief Judge Michael Martinez, thank you very much for your time and look forward to seeing how this plays out.
Thank you very much. And let's remind our jurors that we need them to come down. Our system doesn't work without their participation, and we will do all our best to keep them safe.